Hello everyone and welcome to the second game of the Freestyle Chess Grand Slam Paris finals. Hikaru Nakamura versus Magnus Carlsen, and if Hikaru wants to win, he first needs to beat Magnus in Classical, and then Magnus revives. He has to beat him again in rapid time format, and so on until we have a victor. But that's definitely the first step. He first has to win his game with White in Classical and force tie breaks. Whereas Magnus, he won yesterday with White. He only needs a draw with Black, and obviously that makes it much easier for him to play. So yeah, it's hard to beat Magnus. Beating him on demand, we could say, is much harder. So let's see what Hikaru comes up with. Hikaru with White opens with pawn to b4, and this, I mean, explains everything I've been saying on the channel all of these years. You know, when you absolutely have to win, when you're in a must-win situation, when you know everything is depending on you winning that game, this is the move that has to be played. And here it also makes perfect sense, like it does, for example, I don't know, in the Evans Gambit. Yeah, the queen gets access into the game, you open up your bishop, and also one very important thing is that you prevent symmetrical play right from the start. Here, if Magnus were to repeat, let's say pawn to g5, you can already strike with pawn to a4, making it impossible for Magnus to mimic your moves. For example, a5, captures, you would capture, and after captures, you pick up a pawn, and you are very happy being up a pawn. So that's why after b4, Magnus plays pawn to c6, which fights against the light square bishop. Opening up the light square bishop was the other very good way of starting the game. And now, once Hikaru does it, there will be a pawn on c6, limiting the power of the light square bishop on h1. So, okay, pawn to g3, we have pawn to g6, and bishop to b2. Countering the strong bishop on h8, we have knight to f6 and pawn to f4. And also, you can see something that people very often do when they're in a must-win situation. You just don't play any, you know, you don't take the center. You play nice and slow. You play hyper-modern chess. You control the center via pieces from the sides. So fianchettoing the bishops and just taking it slow, waiting for Magnus to make a mistake. Magnus strikes with pawn to a5. He wants to open up his rook. Pawn to a3, and Magnus castles king side. We have knight to f3, pawn to d5, and knight to f2. We have knight to g4, offering a trade. And this move, not only that it's one of the engine's top recommendations, it also makes perfect sense for Magnus's situation in the match. You want to trade down, you trade knights, you trade bishops, and you'll be that much closer to attaining a draw, and then, you know, just winning the match outright. Bishop captures on h8, we have king captures, and knight to d3. Hikaru wants to avoid as many trades as possible, and Magnus will make it as hard for him as possible. He will either force trades, or he will get a better position while Hikaru is avoiding those trades. Pawn to f6, now with ideas of maybe pawn to e5 in the future. Castles kingside by Hikaru, and knight to f7. We have queen to b2, nicely aligning the queen with the king on h8, and Magnus goes knight to d6. We have pawn to e3, and now knight back to h6. Here you could also put a knight on c4 right away, but there's no reason for Magnus to push anything. Plus the queen will be very comfortable on c3, guarding d2 and maintaining this diagonal. So he tries knight back to h6, and Hikaru goes knight back to f2, saying, okay, I might improve my pawn structure a little bit as you've decided to retreat. And Magnus says, nope, I'm only, you know, messing around. If you want to repeat moves, that's perfectly fine. If you draw, I win the match. Hikaru goes back, knight d3, and Magnus says, all right, let's, you know, get a threefold repetition. And Hikaru says, nope, no thank you. Bishop to g2. Other ideas, maybe you can play knight c5 instead of knight c2, fix your pawn structure that way, and then if something like, let's say, rook to e8, you will play bishop to g2, and then maybe something like a4, the pawn is very nicely placed there. Maybe something like this with the king still on h8. Of course, Magnus will play king g8 on the next move. So it's hard to say. Hikaru decided to go for bishop to g2 first, and now knight h to f7, knight to d4, and Magnus goes knight to c4, attacking the queen and the d2 pawn. Queen c3, maintaining this diagonal, and a captures on b4. We have a captures. Magnus manages to trade another piece, or rather a rook, captures, and now pawn to e5. It's not an attacking move, it's just the best move there is, and there's no reason to postpone playing it. F captures on e5, F captures on e5, and knight back to b3. We have queen to d6, and the knight to a5. Now, Hikaru, the one offering a trade, as Magnus has a really huge center here. So by trading knights, you could get this pawn all the way to a5. Maybe you can play a6, undermine the pawn structure, make c6 a little bit weak, and then go after Magnus's strong center. So knight captures on a5, b captures, and king to g8. Finally, Magnus unpins from this diagonal. And Hikaru strikes with pawn to e4, probably looking for some sort of an imbalance in the position, hoping that Magnus plays d4. Then, okay, the center is closed, maybe you can create some chances, maybe you push a pawn on the queen side, maybe something happens, but Magnus not interested, even though d4 is the best possible move, and pretty sure that Magnus knows this. He's playing for a win in the match, not a win in the game. Plays d captures on e4, makes the position as simple as possible. D captures on e4, and bishop to h3. And don't mistake this for sort of playing with a draw. Usually when you play, for a draw, you end up losing the game. It's just that it's very easy to play this position when you trade pawns. There's less tension, and all of this pressure on the f-file that Magnus will create with the queen, with the rook, with the bishop on h3 will be probably, when Magnus is playing and he looks at this position, he doesn't even have to calculate. He sees, all right, this is enough for me to get a draw. So let's see if he's right. Hikaru goes bishop back to h1, queen to f6, and now knight to f2. There are already some threats in the position. Just to give you an example, let's say you play a6, just for the sake of it. The idea is that after, let's say, knight g5 and a7, the real threat is queen a1 check. You sacrifice the queen and you deliver checkmate via rook captures on f1. So of course you have to be prepared for that. Knight to f2 by Hikaru, and knight to g5, and here queen to e3. Another way of doing it is knight captures on h3, which eliminates the bishop from h3. The problem is, once, let's say, king g2, knight g5, this is a disgusting position for white. You cannot get your bishop into the game. f1 is covered by the queen and by the rook. f2 also. f3 by the queen, rook, and knight. Also e4 will be played. You're going to get even more pressure there. There's just nothing to look for here. It could be just dead loss for white. So instead, after knight g5, Hikaru plays queen e3, defends the knight on f2, and Magnus now plays pawn to e4. It seems like a move you shouldn't be able to play because you're attacking this pawn 3 times, but the rook on a1 is undefended. And here Hikaru played rook to e1. Rook to b1, probably Hikaru's last chance of playing for something here, even though after something like queen e5, going after the a5 pawn, let's say bishop g2, everything gets traded off, captures, queen captures on a5, and queen captures, and rook captures on b7. It's still equal, but okay, you have, you've promoted your rook to a pig. Maybe you can create some threats here. The queen is probably coming to e5, so very unlikely, but that is the way it had to be played in order to maybe try something. The problem is Hikaru is so strong that he probably just knows that this is way too simple for Magnus to make a mistake there, so he just plays rook to e1, I guess, trying to make the game last as long as possible, waiting for a blunder. I'm guessing at this level you just don't expect your opponent to make a mistake because something is complicated. Maybe they just make a mistake for the sake of making a mistake. I have no idea. So here queen to f5 by Magnus, and not much more for Hikaru to do. He captures on e4. There's nothing more to try. Knight captures on e4, knight captures on h3, knight captures on d2, and now knight to f4. You could even trade further, but Hikaru, if he wants at least any winning chance, he has to keep the knights in the game. But there is one problem, and Magnus, of course, played it. Let's see how fast you can play it. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds, so try to find this. There are many moves you can play, but this one just ends the game on the spot. Not the game, the match. So the move in question is pawn to g5. That is what Magnus played. He played it very quickly. and there's not much more to be played here. Now you have to trade, because if you move the knight, then knight f3 check picks up the exchange, and you're gonna have to resign. So Hikaru traded, queen captures, pawn captures. We have queen captures, pawn captures, and rook captures on f4. And we have rook and 3 pawns each, and there is nothing more to be done here. Magnus played rook e8 check, king f7. Hikaru even didn't want to repeat with king g7, king g8, so he tried to play it on a little bit. Rook to h8 by Magnus, king g6, and now rook to g8 check, king to h6, and rook to b8. Hikaru went for the a pawn. We have rook captures on b7, rook captures on a5, and rook to b3. And he was in this position on move 41 that Hikaru and Magnus agreed to a draw, as there is nothing more to be done here. And with Magnus winning the first classical game, second ending in a draw, Magnus Carlsen wins the Freestyle Chess Grand Slam Paris tournament, well, seemingly with ease. I mean, there were some problems he had at the game against Nodrbek, where Nodrbek, had sort of the potential to push for a win, but I mean, that's easier said than done. And similar to Morphy, some 167 years ago, Morphy came to Paris, suffered of influenza, but still conquered Paris. Magnus arrived here with a cold, and he conquered Paris with a cold. So in the style of the old masters, one could say. And he even said that in the first game versus Hikaru, when we discussed that bishop to h6 move, that he thought of it that, he played this b4, sort of the freestyle Evans Gambit line, and that he thought about it. It was screaming that it should be played, but he just couldn't calculate it, because he was, he has a cold, he was sick, and he saw the idea right away, but he just couldn't calculate it out all the way. Says that's the reason he didn't play it. But yeah, even crippled like this, he's still victorious, and they have yet to invent a chess variant where Magnus Carlsen does not dominate, it would seem. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it, and this short coverage of the Freestyle Chess Grand Slam Paris tournament. If you have any game that you would really like to see, maybe I've missed it, as I did miss a couple of games, and it's really nice, I would very gladly show it, so use that hashtag suggestion. I would like to thank Derek King, Charles Benjamin Flynn, Dan Schwartz, Ilya Maltsev, and Mohammed Babar Khalil for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.